What's, do you think, the best interview tip that you could ever give an engineer at any level walking into an interview for a job that they really want?
You've already got the job, don't lose it. No employer wants to interview. No employer wants to go through that process. The company wants that role filled. They're interviewing you because they actually think you can do the job. They're not going to interview somebody that they don't think can do it.
Kai Macdonald, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Engineer podcast.
Thanks, Darren. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Openly, I've known you for a long time, and very fond of your work. But for the listeners, tell us a little about Kai Macdonald. What do you do, and what are you about?
Yeah, so I'm the director of Sky Recruitment. Sky Recruitment is a recruitment company focused on the civil consultancy sectors, which I founded, it'll be 20 years ago this year.
Wow, congratulations.
And look, it's been through some changes and iterations over that period of time, but what it is today is I specialize in finding those hard to find niche skill sets for companies. So in that consulting space, and obviously for yourself, it's been geotechs, it's been urban leads, and I've done a lot of work in like tailing space or flooding, and so it's more the people that companies can't find themselves because they're the hidden gems that don't tend to be out on the market, or there's just not enough of them, and they need a very clear reason as to why they would move. So yeah, that is really what I do. Companies come to me when they can't find the people that they want. And after 20 years of doing this, I have a fairly thick black book of names and people that I trust, and they recommend me people and I track them down.
I love that. I mean, obviously, recruiting, resourcing, building teams is, part of a startup consultancy. It's part of a engineering consultancy, project management, urban, you mentioned, geotech, tailings. Without people and the skills, people can't deliver the project. So how do you find those people? And you don't have to give away all your secrets, right? But how do you find those people to fill those roles when, a lot of the time there's just no one out there?
I think the first thing is the saying there's no one out there is a little bit of a myth. The people are out there. Companies just aren't getting their messages to them. Most companies have okay, so we'll put an ad up on LinkedIn, or we'll put an ad up on Seek, or we might have a couple of people that we've worked with before and we'll ask them if they know anybody. But unless you've got a reason, most of the time you go to work, you do your job, you have a decent day, you go home. You're not on LinkedIn, you're not on Seek, you're not, looking at ads, you're doing your job. But fundamentally, the work does get done. Somebody's out there designing the bridges, somebody is out there designing the tailings dam. So the work is getting done. When it comes to a company who looks for somebody and they can't find them, they're just not getting the message in front of the people at the time that it needs to. So as for kind of how I do it, I've got about 100,000 people in my database now that are, engineers or engineers adjacent. So if you're asking me for a particular skill set, I probably know 500 or 600 of those people that have that particular skill set. And then it is talking to them, finding a way to get in contact with them, and asking them, really the question is, what would a role have to offer for you to consider a move? And most people are going to say, no, I'm happy. Changing jobs, too stressful, too much work, don't want to, perfectly happy. But if you talk to enough people, you'll get the 1 in 10, 1 in 20 that are open to a change. And at that point, it then comes down to, well, is what you're looking for what Vinculum can offer, or a different company? Like, do you have the culture fit for it? Is there an alignment between what it is that you want? And it moves very quickly from the, can you design a particular thing, or do you have experience in a particular area, to, are you the right personality, person, culture fit for the company? And that's far, far more important than, whether you've got a particular level of experience, because the skill sets to a degree can be learned. But if you're not the right culture fit, it falls apart really, really fast, even if you have the right skills.
Yeah, so I mean, look, it sounds like dating, right? It's just the game of percentages.
It is. It's speed dating.
Yeah, it's speed dating. And I think about what you said about messaging, and I go, okay, I can understand that. So is it really about marketing in a way? Is it a company marketing the message? Is it marketing their culture so they become more front of mind? Or do you think that's where, your role facilitates something like that to get some of those messages across?
Look, companies can obviously raise their profile through marketing, through events, through 3 degrees of separation, through attending, university open days and things like that. Like, there is an ability there to reach a percentage of people. But in the end, you are kind of only ever touching on people who are, what I would call active candidates or close to active candidates. They are people who are open to and considering changing jobs.
Yeah.
The reality is that most people create a LinkedIn profile and then don't ever look at LinkedIn ever again. All of the marketing that companies put up on LinkedIn about all of the things that they do, they tend to only hit the same people who are engaged with that platform.
Yeah.
Seek, people don't visit Seek to kill time. They visit Seek because they want to change jobs. So you're only going to get those people at Seek who you're competing against every other company. You're only going to get the people on LinkedIn who are engaged with LinkedIn already. And I would say that's probably only 10 to 20% of the market.
Right.
You've probably then got another 30 or 40% of the market who have a profile on LinkedIn, but don't ever actually log in. And then you've got, I think the stats are about 40% of the consulting engineers have never created a profile on LinkedIn. And so for a lot of people, a lot of companies, they are invisible.
Those statistics, that's crazy, right? I never would have thought that at all.
Yeah, like I know when I talk to a company and they'll tell me I've got 300 staff in Australia. I then look at that company on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn tells me they have 200 staff, because roughly a third of them are not on there. And there's a lot of people that don't want to feel that they'll get spammed by agencies, or feel it's an invasion of privacy, or lots of different reasons. But there are a lot of people that don't want to engage with LinkedIn or other online platforms. And so finding those ones is quite difficult. It varies very much depending on the type of person. But generally, you can find little footprints of people. Once they reach a certain level, you can find hints of them around.
Yeah, like a footprint.
Yeah, but like a lot of the time, so councils, for example, most of the work that is submitted by consultancies
Yeah.
To councils or public sector, you can actually get accurate access to the documentation.
Yeah.
And when you pull those documentation apart, you can then find the names of people that are involved in doing it. And then once you've got a name, you have a rough idea. You know, if you're looking at highway design and you can see that it was signed off by a particular person, well, you know that they're going to be a chartered engineer with a transport background. It doesn't matter if they're on LinkedIn there, you have enough information to track them down.
Yeah. Nice plug too for the 3 degrees of separation. Big shout out for that. You mentioned a lot of things about the why. And I wonder if you mentioned culture, obviously very important. What's some of the why? And I'm not so talking about, I don't want to unpack it because, everyone's got their reasons and motivations and everything, but I mean, is that something that you've ever really tracked to get a good understanding of why people move? Because that's super insightful for any hiring manager.
Yeah, it does vary very much person to person. And I would say that it does vary quite a lot depending on the size of the company that they're working for. When you're looking at a smaller company, generally the rationale for looking to move falls into either the company that I'm working for isn't of a size to get onto the really big projects, and I really want to work on a major railway or a major highway project, and the company that I'm working for just isn't at the scope to be able to do that. And so you'll get that. But I'd say that the majority of reasons why people leave smaller organizations is generally personality based. Smaller organizations where you have, one person who is the director, or two people that have the director, and they have the overwhelming majority of the power in that organization, you inevitably get to a point where people feel that Joe over there is the chosen one and I'm not. And that's the biggest reason why I get people wanting to leave, sub 100 person companies, is the opportunities aren't there for me because my manager doesn't see that opportunity in me, or I'm not part of the in group and I'm not in the clique. And so you'll see it. You'll look at a company and you'll see, let's say it's a 20 person company, you'll see 10 people who have been there forever.
Yeah.
And they will never leave. But the other 10 all have relatively short 2-year cycles where they're moving through. And it's consistently that they're not part of the in-group. Like that is obviously a massive generalization. And there are companies where that isn't the case, but that's the number one cause that I'll see from smaller ones is I don't get the opportunities.
Yeah, because I love to unpack that because I think, in working for large and small companies, medium, throughout my career, I always had this feeling that, there's more opportunities in a smaller organization than maybe in a large one. And then also, I also felt that there's also a relationship about as you go through your career, culture and work satisfaction is more important than money. So there's like this counterintuitive sort of graph, I'm a graph guy, right? Sort of seeing what that is and getting your take on maybe your experience there.
Yeah, look, I think if you join a small organization, your ability to influence what it is that is happening in that company is significantly greater. You can be a big fish in a small tank and have a lot of autonomy, a lot of potential personal financial rewards, a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability to influence things around you. You know, the person that you need to convince to say, hey, I've got this really cool idea and I want to do this, is in the room with you. And
Yeah.
so you have access to the decision maker. And generally speaking, with a smaller organization, you're not going to be looking at having pigeonholes or role descriptions defined that say, you know, to do this role, you have to have this and this and this and this. And if you don't have all of those things, then I'm sorry, you can't do that, because smaller companies have to be more flexible. People have to be willing to take on a greater range of things. And so, yeah, there is absolutely more opportunity to fast track your career with a smaller organization than a larger one. The flip side is that one person holds the majority of the power, or two people hold the majority of the power in a small organization. You make a bad impression on them. It's not like you can go and transfer to a different floor and join a different team and go from there. So it's kind of, it does come down to the internal culture of a company. As you know, will they give those opportunities to somebody that joins a smaller one, or do you have to have been part of the original 5 that founded it? What is the scope? But definitely a smaller organization will allow you to fast track your career up to a point.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it depends on what it is that you want to do. You know, you would know, there isn't going to be a role at Vinculum currently leading, 2,000 people across multi-regions, whereas, that could be something that you could get at GHD.
Sure.
And so there is different potential outcomes there, and different people want different things. Do you want to play the politics in a big organization, or does that make you want to hang yourself from a ceiling fan? Is going to decide which direction you're going to want to go in there.
I hear you. So you mentioned something there about, maybe people going in shorter durations between companies, leapfrogging through different businesses. How long or how short is too short a time between jobs, and how do you look at that? I know everyone's got their different experiences, but you hear a lot, LinkedIn, they didn't accept me because I had 2 years here and 2 years there, or, people go, I went on a holiday or whatever. It's like, oh, great. Are you secure? Are you loyal? Like what's your take on that? Because it's quite topical.
It's always about the story.
Yeah.
The person who does 2 years working for a consultancy in, say, Brisbane, and then works for 2 years, or works for a year for a consultancy in London, then works for a year in Germany, and then ends up coming back to Brisbane, so has got 3 jobs in 4 years, is going to be much more open to being accepted than the same candidate looking for their 4th job in 4 years and they've stayed in the same location the whole time.
Yeah, 100%.
It very much is around the story as to why the changes are there. And sometimes, you join companies and they're not the right fit. Yeah. And so it might be that, 3 months or 6 months that you were there, or, the company that you joined fell apart, or just straight up, you got a better offer, an offer that was one of those too good to ever turn down offers. And so you moved. I guess if I'm looking at a candidate, and a candidate is sitting at that consistent every 2 years, I'm looking for a job, I'm going to get a lot of pushback from companies that they're a job hopper. They've not spent enough time in any company to really learn anything. You know, if they join, they'll just leave again in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so and if you've got that consistent, if you're at 4 or 5 jobs in 8 to 9 years, you are probably going to struggle. Whether you can do the job or not, whether you are a really good employee or not, whether there's legitimate reasons as to why, you're starting to get to the point where it doesn't really matter. It's starting to be, people will make that judgment call just and won't even give you the chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit unfair, but it's the reality of it. So you've got to have a story.
What key advice would you give for a young engineer looking for a job right now?
It's coming back to what I was saying about the fact that companies advertise on Seek or they advertise on LinkedIn, but just like the candidates or people are not all seeing those ads, not all jobs are advertised. I would actually say, in my experience, it's more like the overwhelming majority of roles that I place are never advertised. And what I tend to do is, with a good candidate, I tend to talk to companies about creating and shaping the role for that person. And so if you're a young engineer, you need to be looking at the companies that use your skill sets and finding ways to make connections with those companies, not looking at Seek ads or LinkedIn ads and going, okay, those are my only options. That would be the biggest thing, is that most employers will rate initiative and drive far above anything else. And having a message come through from a candidate saying, hey, this is what I am, is there any opportunities for me, will differentiate that candidate from the overwhelming pool. That's the biggest thing. You will get a job by being seen, and if you're not being seen, you don't have a chance. And a Seek ad getting applicants, and I don't advertise on Seek anymore because I find it doesn't have any value, because for every one person that would apply that is even remotely close to what I'm looking for, I've 300 or 400 other completely disconnected applicants that I have to process and have to go through and have to respond to. It's just a massive time sink, and so there's just no efficiency to doing it.
Yep, not sponsored by Seek, I'll give you that much, but we're open. Yeah. We're open. If you'd like advice, we're here.
Yeah, and obviously you're very active on LinkedIn, and you've got lots of great content there. Interacting with that sort of content will raise the profile. You put a comment that is intelligent onto a post, somebody will click your profile.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because literally this afternoon someone said that and I hate talking about it, but someone made a comment on one of my posts that got 85 likes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. And it was very cool. It made me think. I loved it. It was a great comment. And you're right, there's so much easy ways to piggyback off other people's content. If you don't have a big following or you don't have lots of connections, making a very insightful comment on others' posts is a very quick way to accelerate your network.
Absolutely. I don't, I'm sure there's a rationale to it that people have. I don't personally understand it. The way LinkedIn works is that you can only see people who are connections of your connections plus one. So it's like that third degree separation. I don't really understand why you wouldn't want to accept every connection. I'm sure there's a reason, but I don't know it, because anybody that's in your industry or close to opens up and increases the number and breadth of people that you personally will have access to. And so, you know, connecting to yourself or to me, where we've both got far too many connections on LinkedIn, is going to multiply the reach of any particular candidate or person into the market and the network that LinkedIn represents.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, you know, if you're a graduate, or, you know, coming towards the end of your degree, use the university alumni system. You know, your tutors are often people working in the industry. Your lecturers are probably well connected as well. They will have people that were their students from 5 or 6 years ago or 20 years ago that are now working in sectors. And if you've made a good impression on your lecturers and tutors, they'll be like, well, go and give Darren a call, or, you know, here's his mobile number.
Yeah.
People underestimate that, and people are very reserved, particularly, I would say, people in the engineering technical sectors are very reserved about having the personal connections. I don't think a lot is lost by not wanting to do that.
Yeah, it's a sad stereotype. And it's obviously I'm trying to break that cycle by having these conversations, try and get people out there and let them know that it's okay to knock on the door, to ask the question, to tap again, knock again, push again, follow up. You know, I think that you mentioned attitude, you know, having a young engineer with tenacity, rocking up at the door with their CV. I mean, I've told people to do it. I've seen people being successful doing it. So you're bang on, and I think you're right too. Your network surface area. You know, the bigger that surface area is, and the more ability you have to reach out to different people.
Yeah,
Most definitely.
and it's just, and particularly if you're working in the industry. So if if you've got 5 years worth of experience, I'm doing some workshops with a consultancy at the moment, which is around trying to shift the mindset for what business development actually is from an engineering consultancy perspective. Because a lot of people have this idea that business development is this knocking on doors and going, hey, have you got work for me? As opposed to realizing that people buy from people.
Yeah.
And if you are already dealing with a client because you're delivering work, that there is the most simple opportunity that you will ever get to build relationships and build potential future workload. And I don't know too many people that did an engineering degree and started their career as a civil engineer on a whim and didn't really care. Like, people end up in engineering because it's something that they were passionate about. The degree is not easy. You've got to work hard to get through it. You know, I saw you telling Reese that you had to give him photocopies of lecture notes. But, you know, so generally speaking, the people who are in the industry are there because they were interested in it. And people like to talk about things that they're interested in. So when you're halfway through a project and talking to your client going, hey, do you fancy a coffee? And meeting your client face to face and going out to their office and sitting down and having a coffee, you don't actually even have to say, hey, what's the next bit of work? That will come naturally because you've gone and sat down with them.
Yeah, you know, it's crazy. So many things you just said obviously resonate. And one thing that comes to mind is I remember someone said a few years ago that the best business development you can ever do is just to do a good job.
Yes.
And whoever does a good job will get asked to do another job. I mean, that's simple, right? And I think a lot of people overlook the other aspect which you mentioned is about the personal touch, getting to know people. It's not always about the work, it's about grabbing that coffee or having a beer or whatever it is and just, shooting it and talking about your family and your life and
Yeah. So that one there of if you do good work, you'll get more work has become one that, at least in my opinion, consulting engineers will hide behind.
yeah.
I do good work, so companies will come to me.
Yeah.
And I don't need to do anything more than that. You want the structural analysis. I've done a really good structural analysis. There can be no complaints about it. And I've emailed it across to you. And our communication was one telephone call and then a bunch of Teams messages, and then finally a report that you asked for a couple of changes, and then I did a final version and I submitted. But I did really good work, so you'll definitely come back to me.
Where's the next job? Like, come on, line me up.
Yeah, but is that realization that, yeah, you did great work, but you haven't differentiated yourself because you are just an email in an inbox. And I have seen a lot of consulting engineers go, I do good work, work will come to me. Oh, now there's not enough work coming in. How do I find work? Well, I did a really good job for that company 2 years ago. They should be, I'll ring them. Oh, they're sending work to my competitor, but I did really good work. Why didn't they come to me?
Yeah.
And
so how do you stay front of mind?
You need to make the deliverable attached to you as a person.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. Like if you do good work, make sure that good work is attached to Darren Flynn. Otherwise there isn't that separation between, your company and the next company and the next company. It's just a brand logo on a report. But the other one is actually realizing that clients or anybody like to feel like they've been thought of, that somebody did think of them, and that the telephone call 2 months after you've submitted the report to go, hey, how's the project going? Did you end up sorting whatever that thing out? Will put you constantly back at front of mind.
Yeah.
And that's particularly the case for things like environmental approvals type work,
yeah.
or renewable energy is another big one, because it goes where the project might sit still for 2 years and then all of a sudden they have all of the money and it has to be done now. That 2-year period, nobody is talking to the client because the client doesn't have any work right then. But that just means when they do actually get to the point of, oh, we've got money to spend, you're just a distant memory.
Yeah.
So that continuous communication is what I think is key.
The power of the follow-up.
Yes, absolutely.
So important. Just like you with your recruitment, right? You've got to be continually pushing nonstop. And then every now and then you just got to ring just to say hi and how you going and what problems do you have right now? Or like, hey, thought I'd just give you a buzz. How'd you go with that thing?
Yep.
Okay. That's how I think you can stay front of mind as well.
That and nagging. I do a lot of
nagging works.
My job.
Yeah, nagging works. Yeah. Well,
Darren, are we going to talk to this person? What's your diary looking like?
You are a recruiter and you've got to stand up to your reputation.
Yep.
That's right. So, all right, flipping it back to the whole, recruiting part.
Yeah.
Advice for young engineers. And I guess just sort of leaning a little bit into the interview. How many interviews are too many?
Does depend on the level of the role. But generally speaking, if you're past 2, there needs to be a genuine reason as to why.
Yeah.
if you're at 5 interviews, something has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
I will say that as you get more senior and more strategic into, and you're talking, national sector leads or chief technical officer type roles, then yes, you do tend to get more, and interviews might involve things like presentations and stuff like that. But for, I don't want to say generic, a delivery, a delivery level engineer, in that sort of 5 to 10 years worth of experience, two conversations, 2 interviews should be enough.
Yeah. 36% of listeners won't subscribe to this podcast, and that's a real shame. If you want to help me share the stories and help others learn and grow, then please like and subscribe. I'm with you 100%. So do you think the best interview tip that you could ever give an engineer at any level walking into an interview for a job that they really want?
You've already got the job, don't lose it. Basically, no employer wants to interview. No employer wants to go through that process. If I know that if you could look around your office and go, I need another person at that level, if you could click your fingers and clone the person you've already got in that role, that's exactly what you would do. Line managers don't want to look at CVs, don't want to do interviews, don't want to have to go through the hassle, because that's not what they're there. That's not what they signed up to do. It's a chore. So sure, there will be situations where you are one of 3 candidates going for a role, but the reality is that the company wants that role filled. They're interviewing you because they actually think you can do the job. They're not going to interview somebody that they don't think can do it. So when you walk in the door, there is a vested interest in the employer in going, yes, that person can do the job. Yes, they look normal. Yes, they communicate properly. I think I can work with them. Brilliant. Their technical skills stack up. Great. Here's the job offer. And I think that's the biggest thing, because people stress themselves out. They think they've got to impress. They think they've got to make up stories. They pressurize themselves far too much. Whereas you just realize it's a bit like a driver's license. When you do your driving exam,
right,
when you do your driver's test, you actually have a provisional driving license for the duration of that test. The question is whether they take it off you at the end of the test or not.
I love the analogy. So, do you think, though, that gives maybe a false impression of confidence, or people think, well, because you're right, like, I don't want to stuff it up, right? And I do think that sometimes, after interviewing many people, sometimes you do get people that are they're too confident. Maybe they think they've already got the job, and you're thinking, no, hold on, you don't have this job yet. Do you think it could be counterintuitive?
I think if you're going to go in and be arrogant, which is really what you're describing there, they probably were going to be an employee that was going to be arrogant once they were in the door.
Yeah, sure.
And so I guess from an employer's perspective, it gives you a good vision that actually you probably don't want that in the office. And, it could be, though, that is what the employer wants, that they want that level of, hey, I've got this and I'm the big swinging. But if it's not, then they're not going to get through. But it really is that is them losing the job.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
It is you're taking a person there and they've presented in a way that you didn't like. And so they've lost the job rather than winning the job, because the job wasn't there to be won. The job was there for them to lose.
So maybe just zooming out a little bit and thinking a little bit more broader. So, we're seeing housing crisis. You know, Olympics, obviously on the wire. Is it
Yeah.
happening? Is it not happening? Where's the stadium? No one knows. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about pipeline. Pipeline's just this new buzzword. I don't
Yeah.
know if it came out of the back of COVID and people are talking about infrastructure. There was a boom, there's a bust, there's mining, there's this, across, the East Coast, West Coast. What's your state of play of the market right now that you can see from your, recruitment desk?
Um, Obviously, I'm on the outside looking in, and everything is kind of hearsay. But it's a really strange market from my perspective. I've 2013 was probably the worst for consulting engineering that I saw, and the reality was everybody was hurting. It didn't matter whether you were big, small, what sector. The work was just not there, and it was a painful time. But what I'm seeing now is a very much a 2 or 3 speed economy, depending on almost the size of the consultancy itself. A lot of the major consultancies are making redundancies. But I'm also seeing the people that are being made redundant getting a job offer before they've even made it to the lift of being made redundant and getting a pay rise. So it's definitely doesn't seem to be that the work isn't there to be done. It definitely seems to be a rebalancing of the wider consulting engineering market, where I'm not sure of the root cause of it, but it does seem like the larger multidisciplinaries have potentially become a little bit inefficient in, off the back of record levels of major infrastructure spend.
Yeah.
And they're just not set up to be able to chase the smaller front end type engineering works or compete with the leaner, more specialized companies on the smaller infrastructure jobs. But the work still has to be done. I had, and there's definitely some internal stress. Like one of the major consultancies upset a big chunk of their staff because they sent a fairly aggressive email around about timesheet hygiene, and how their system was you got black marks, and if you got a certain number of black marks, you wouldn't get a pay rise. And they were like, if your time is not allocated to a job within 2 weeks of that time, that would count as a black mark.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, in theory, if you're working on a project, you should put your time on that job and your timesheet should be kept up to date. That's fine until it was pointed out that it takes 2.5 weeks to set up a new project in their current system. And
yeah,
so you would have certain teams that would start on a project the second the client would give go ahead, deliver that project because it was only like an 8-day job, and complete it before the project was created, and then they were getting wrapped across the knuckles for failing on their timesheet hygiene. So, you've got some situations like that, which I think are reflective of we've been working on West Connects or massive, massive projects that run for 2 years. We need to be as nimble. Perhaps we need to rebalance to be a little bit more responsive.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about big and small and culture and trajectory and this whole interrelationship about size of company. Do you feel that, and you said 2 to 3 speed economy, do you feel that and you mentioned maybe rebalance, do you think there's a shift towards smaller, more nimble, more dynamic engineering firms that are growing at a very more exponential rate than some of the larger conglomerate, larger multidisciplinary firms that might be restructuring, less efficient, making more redundancies. They don't have the big work to support their
Yeah,
heads. Can you see that in the marketplace?
definitely. But I also think it is cyclic, and we've seen it before.
Mm,
Um, you know, when the going is really, really, really good, we tend to see consolidation in the market. You
yeah,
know, you can go back to the mid to late 2000s when Cardno was buying every single company that, you know, had more than 5 people. And just the rate that, you know, the multipliers that were being offered and the rate of acquisition during that time was huge. And it was because there was just so much work that you were really just needing to buy capacity. And when you bought capacity, you made money off it.
yeah,
When the work level is not so extremely busy, though, the cracks start to form in those organizations. You get, you know, middle managers get exposed where there's a lot of people doing where you're like, what is your contribution to the billability rates? And you start to get pressure on, oh, you need to up the billability of your team. You know, your chargeability of your team for grads needs to be above 90%, and pressure starts to come down, and people walk out and set up on their own.
yeah.
And so we're starting to see a lot of new consultancies be formed from leadership groups of larger companies. They are generally picking, you know, the group of people that they've worked with for quite some time, that they know and they trust, and they know that they can work together, and they go out, and to a degree the clients follow them. And they can target work that was otherwise ignored by the company.
Mm,
So yeah, there is definitely an uptick in new consultancies forming, but it is that cycle.
mm,
And I think we'll see, you know, 3 or 4 years time, we'll start swinging back into the acquisition phase again.
mm,
Definitely, the more nimble companies are being much more successful.
yeah. You
And
mentioned
it's happening a lot.
You mentioned cycles, and it's funny because I reflect on maybe a conversation we might have had a long time ago.
Mm.
Something that someone mentioned the other day, and I did see someone also post about it, something very similar on LinkedIn, was about this whole mid-level engineers, right? This whole maybe, and I'm going to just pick some numbers here, but call it 7 to 8 year,
Yeah.
8 to 10 year engineer. Like, and I remember years ago, it was like, oh, where are they? Where are they? Like, where are all these mid-level engineers? And now people are going, oh, where are they again? And I'm like, oh, well, that was 5 years ago. I guess we're in this cycle again.
Yep.
It just makes me laugh. But I do reflect on that, and I openly go, well, actually, you're right. Where are they?
They're doing IT. Um,
Are they? Is that what happens now? That's the segue.
well, it's okay. So, you know, COVID was 5 years ago now.
True.
Um, so the start of COVID was horrendous from my perspective, because all of the placements that I made in the run up to March of 2020, all the companies let them go in their probation period and said, "Can we have our money back, please?"
Oh, ouch.
That was, you know, so much fun. But essentially, if you changed jobs really from, say, Christmas 2020, there really wasn't any hiring up until about September 2020. And a lot of people either didn't start their career at all, or got caught in that, you know, they moved at that time and they got pushed out, or they you know, were relatively junior, you know, 2 years, 3 years worth of experience, and all of a sudden it's your work from home. You, particularly in Melbourne, you're not getting the training and development because it's work from home. A lot of companies weren't set up to do it. Everybody's sort of pulled in their claws. At the same time, though, the IT sector absolutely exploded. Every company went from, oh, I don't want to be in the cloud, I don't understand it, to I need to be on Azure or AWS yesterday. And so if you were an engineer, you had the mathematical background to go into IT. And you can actually see a huge number of the people, who are 8 to 10 years experience in IT now have electrical, mechanical, civil, structural degrees.
It's a very interesting reflection.
Yeah. And, as an industry, consulting engineering does not like investing in its juniors. It doesn't want to.
That's harsh.
I'm going to stand by that one.
Wow. I commented on something today on LinkedIn about that because someone said something that, it resonated, but it made me just go, hold on, like, I don't actually think that's right. But you actually think that's the case. Tell me, expand on that.
If I say to a company, will you hire a grad, or would you like me to get a 2-year experience grad from a competitor? Every single time they'll want the 2-year experience grad from the competitor. And consistently, I am told by companies that it takes too long and it costs too much money to get a grad up to the point of being billable, and then they'll just move because we've had to bear the cost of training them up, and so we can't afford to pay them as much as the company next door that hasn't had to bear the cost in training them. And so you take on a grad, you pay them 75 and you get them to, let's say you get them to 90 at 2 years, and you've only really been making money on them for the last 6 months. Well, they can catch a lift and go to a consultancy on a different floor. We'll pay them 100. And that is repeatedly, I've been told that more times than I can count. And I think
that sounds like a lot of times.
Yeah, it is a very consistent theme, and it's not one sector. It's, structural, civil, geotech, environmental. It's the same thing across the industry of it is cheaper for us to get somebody else's training and bring it in than it is for us to do it ourselves.
Yeah, it's funny because there are, I think there's a thought out there that, it's the fastest way to get to 100. How do you get to 100? And I always thought, well, it's easy. You just do some undergraduate work, and when you graduate, you ask for 100. Like, but I guess there's a lot of people that are in that position. But I guess I see and I hear what you're saying. But I think that might be from maybe a larger organization. And I think it depends on the training and your systems and procedures and standard operating procedures and who and how and what. Because openly, and I'll only say it, and I've maybe not said it so publicly, but I hired a first year undergraduate engineer. And, are they billable? Yeah, sure. But, that's not, I think that might be an outlier, maybe like the whole, cultural piece, or maybe like all the other analogies we talked about. But I could understand that from a level where, maybe grads do get maybe some menial tasks. Maybe they're not looped into projects at a higher level. Maybe there is something there. So anyway.
I will say culturally and demographically, Vinculum is a little different to most other consultancies that I deal with. I will say that I feel that you give a lot more opportunity to younger engineers than they will see pretty much anywhere else. And I'll put that as a pitch out there for you, is that you give a lot of opportunity for people who are willing to put in the effort and have the initiative to go for it. I will say that you are an outlier in that regard, and
Mm.
that engineering, I would say, is a relatively conservative industry where we've always done it this way, so we'll always do it this way,
Mm.
is the majority of the sector. And going, okay, well, I could take on a grad as a geotech to go out and do site investigations, but I'm going to have to send my 4-year out with him for the first 6 months to shadow him. So that's going to cost, I'm basically paying for the grad and I'm paying for somebody who's overqualified for 6 months on that. And I'm gambling that graduate will grow to being the person who can do the work at the quality level that I need it to be.
Yep. Yep.
Or, there's these guys over there. I'll just go and tap one of theirs that's already knows how to sit on a drill rig and take core samples.
I hear you.
So, yeah, the bigger companies do have graduate schemes,
Yeah.
And I will say some of the majors have very good graduate schemes.
Yeah, rotation and whatnot.
Yeah, and where they go and they can work across multiple sectors and they can get experience to whole different areas, and they are fantastic. But as an entire industry, you probably need 3 or 4 times as many of those roles for it to be, because we hear the same thing consistently. There's not enough people with the skill sets.
Yeah.
Principals now are apparently 12 years or 10 years experience. You can be a principal now. 5 years experience is senior. It's all that, and it's all pressure because there's just not enough technical ability in the entire demographic in the industry.
It's crazy because segue, I had it written down here in my notepad about competency. I have commented on it openly in public forums about, where did all the gray hairs go? I've seen it. I'm living it where I am now. And, having, I don't know, 25, 24 years experience or whatever, and being considered senior, or at least, a director or whatnot. You mentioned some of those stats there. I mean, 10 years at a principal, I'm like, wow. I mean, that is and can be. And I see it and have seen it throughout my career. But do you feel, like you said, because there is a shortage, that has meant that titles have accelerated faster than competency? Do you feel like because of that shortage, and I know it's a tough situation, and I acknowledge I don't believe that we have enough engineers to fuel our pipeline of infrastructure.
No.
And I do see a lot of engineers retiring or finishing up. But even for me now, between where I am and seeing engineers retire, like I can't, there's not a lot out there that I know, like
No. So, I mean,
in front of me, and I'm not really even that old, I guess.
Well, this is because there was a big recession in the late 90s and start of 2000. I know because I graduated into it. And of all things, of somebody who ended up as a recruiter, I couldn't find a job for over a year. But the reality is that because we had a fairly significant economic contraction then, it was the last recession that we had outside of the COVID contraction, that is where a lot of the people that should have been more experienced than you starting in the 90s just never went into the industry at all. They never existed. It's very hard for me to comment on competency. In the end, I'm not an engineer myself, but what I have seen is the thresholds for where certain titles are allocated to people have come down.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be that if somebody had a title of principal before 20 years worth of experience, they were probably like 17 years worth of experience at the absolute earliest. And if they were a principal with 17 years of experience, they were probably God tier. You know, that they were somebody that everybody was like, yeah, that person is just brilliant, and that's why they're a principal. And I've seen it come down and down and down and down, and it started to be where other qualifications start to have a greater bearing from my perspective than the actual title that they're on. Like when you're starting to go, well, are they chartered or RPEQ, or are they a suitably qualified professional? You know, can they be, you know, a responsible engineer on a dam? Because those start to be very fixed levels that are given by the client side or the regulator, rather than a title that might have been given by a company that needs to give that title in order to maintain retention.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen design manager and or even senior engineer, 3 years experience, 4 years experience, post grad. And I'll go, okay, well maybe they had some undergrad. Oh no, they didn't. I always try to tie it back to competency. And you mentioned chartership and RPEQ. Like I think they're important. Milestones can level the bar, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it is a widespread problem, and I don't know as an industry how we can tackle that.
It's also, just by the nature of consulting engineering, there is a little bit of a perverse incentive to increase the title of the staff that you've got because you're charging them to your client.
That's right.
You can argue that this guy is a principal, or you can charge him at $280 or $320 an hour to your client. So you have, as a consultancy, a vested interest in pushing up the title. So yeah, I don't have a great solution for that one but definitely the titles have accelerated, and it also becomes a challenge because some companies are still very strict in you will not be a principal until you've got 20 years experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, if you've got a person who has a principal title working for a company that doesn't have that sort of strictness, you can often run into, well, I won't go to that company if they won't give me the principal title.
Yeah.
So you do have that kind of self-reinforcing thing of once one company starts saying, you know, a grad with 1 year experience is a principal, we're all going to end up down at that level eventually, and we'll have to add new titles on top.
Oh, I've always been a big fan of multi-layers of titles.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anyone just move just for a title? Same
all the time.
All the time.
All the time. Different cultures have place different importance on titles.
Yes.
And yeah, there are some cultures where my experience has been that title is more important than anything else.
Yeah. I do you think it's, I mean, I reflect it's more important for a younger engineer or moving into an engineering leadership role is a big deal. You know, it means more responsibility, a little bit of prestige, like the little amount of prestige that engineers will get. So I could see that, but I find it crazy that someone would just move, for the same money, similar company, similar projects, just for a title change.
They will, absolutely. I mean, people move for all kinds of really random reasons.
Yeah, I know.
But definitely, like title, I've seen title stop moves many times before, and I've seen it create moves as well. Like,
I don't like the title.
Well, one of the companies that I work with, to be a principal by their rules, you have to be a shareholder.
Right.
So you can't it doesn't matter. You could be 35 years worth of experience. You can't be a principal until you're a shareholder, and that's their structure. And
I don't even know how you manage the whole, because I remember there was this whole like associate and principal, and
yep,
some companies the principal's more than associate, and others it's associate's more than a principal. And
yep.
you just go, I'm just so confused.
And then where does technical director sit?
Well, it's above
Um,
all of those, obviously.
does it?
I don't know. I don't know anymore, Kai.
No, I mean, you take technical director. I would assume, like generally speaking, I kind of go interchangeable with principal a lot of the time. But even then,
No. I see that as above even an associate, unless they're an associate director.
no, it's well, like so. It's quite a few of the companies that don't have principal as a title at all,
True.
and have technical director as kind of the equivalent. And so, yeah, I've moved quite a few people whose title are technical director and move them to principal. And
Oh, because they
no,
wanted.
well,
Well, not,
but as in that's the sort of the parity,
that's the yeah. Okay, I could see that though.
And then associate, it really depends. Some associate means you're a shareholder.
Right.
Others it doesn't, and it's just kind of years of experience ends up being like guidelines based on years. Does end up being a lot of the thing that I use as guidance.
So I wanted to ask you about the future of recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tech, AI agents, people talking about, the future of this and the future of engineering and the future of land contamination. What's your take on the future of recruitment, given where we are in the technical landscape?
So I've just cracked over 22 years doing recruitment. And when I first started recruitment, I sent CVs to companies via fax to give you sort of like, that was where I cut my teeth, was literally taking the CVs and going to an admin team and having them post the CV to 20 different companies. Email made a huge difference. Other than that, I don't think anything's really changed the job that much. LinkedIn is a database that kind of self-updates, so it's nice. But I remember when Seek was going to make recruitment agents obsolete. LinkedIn was going to make recruitment agencies obsolete. Now AI is going to make recruitment agents obsolete.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I still pretty much work the same way that I did 20 years ago, where I pick up the phone and I ring people. When, over the years, I've had, a fair few people work for me. And one of the kind of things that I've always tried to give to a grad who's never done recruitment or any kind of work before, this is what recruitment is when you go to a party or you're a barbecue or a social function, there are really three things that tend to get asked by people when you're first meeting them. It's, where do you live? Who's your partner? And what do you do for a living? And people self-identify so much of their own personal worth from their job. And we spend more time doing it than we do pretty much anything else. And so until employees stop being human, recruitment is still going to be a human process. It's going to be that person, their hopes, their dreams, their mentality, their culture fit, what they want fits that company, but doesn't fit that company.
Yeah.
And if AI is doing that, then none of us are probably working anymore. Because it's replaced us. But yeah, look, I get continuous, sales pitches of AI will replace everything that I'm doing and doing it all for me. Not for the industries in which I operate. Maybe if you were maybe if you were operating in a sector where you are volume recruitment and it's just about getting, 300 people into a particular company in short order, that might have more of an impact. But for highly skilled and in demand skill sets, I'm not really seeing much change.
I love it. Well, I'm sure that your job is safe for many years, given your relationship building skills, the amount of people you must talk to per day. I don't think you have anything to worry about.
I hope not. But if I come up with a way to automate it, I'll give that a go. I do think that consulting engineering is going to be shaken up a lot by some of the AI and language model, and in particular image analysis tools that are coming out.
Yeah.
As I've shown you, I've got a little thing that I'm working on to try and do some of the early phase analysis of contaminated land projects to see how much of that can actually be done by image analysis software rather than a low level kind of grad +1. And I have spoken to a few people before where they're like, are you going to be taking the jobs away from people who do that? And my thoughts are is that the calculator didn't, the computer didn't. We're just way more efficient now than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And AI, language models, image analysis, whatever, is just going to be a tool that's going to let us be more efficient.
Yeah.
Which is only going to be a good thing because there's not enough people with the skill set. So if we can make one of them manage to get the output of 2, then we can get twice as many projects delivered, and maybe we can stop having a housing shortage because things are tied up in design phases.
Mate, you're speaking my language.
So, yeah, I'd be interested to know where you think the future of recruitment and things like that are going to end up from the client side.
Mate, unfortunately, I don't have another hour and a half.
Fair enough.
But I'm very happy to talk about it on another episode. And Kai Macdonald, I'd be very happy to continue this conversation. It's been a pleasure having you on, mate. And maybe we should pick up another conversation and just do an episode on that because I could talk forever on that. But mate, thank you so much for coming on.
No worries at all.
Pleasure. I hope there's some young engineers and some people that got a lot out of that. Hopefully you get something out of it too. Thanks for all the plugs.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. Please like and subscribe. It helps us reach so many more aspiring engineering professionals and entrepreneurs. You can find us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube.